Tough Call Mediation is brought to you by Ayler Mediation and Legal Services, serving your mediation and legal service needs in Ontario, New York, and throughout North America. You can reach us at info@aylerservices.com or go to our website at aylerservices.com. That's EHLER services.com.
Hello, and welcome to Tough Call, a mediation podcast. My name is CT Ayler. I am with my lovely co-host, Dale Sheldon.
Hello.
And we also have a lovely guest, Mr. Michael MacConnell. Good day to you, sir.
Good day. Happy to be here.
Now, listeners, here's the thing. We've already had a chance to meet. I'm now his best friend in the whole world, and he is mine. We've connected on a lot of things, but unfortunately, listeners, the recording wasn't great. So we're doing a take two today, and Mr. MacConnell, Mike, has been so kind to come back and return. And the great thing is we get to delight Dale with all of the wonderful things that Mike is. Are you excited, Dale?
I'm so excited.
Buckle up.
Here we go.
Yes.
So, listeners, I just wanted to actually introduce Mike a little bit in a slightly different way. I didn't realize when I was connecting with him that he was the author of The Yoga of Divorce, a Mindful Route to Resolving Disputes, because I had come across that book during my mediation training, and I had read a small part of it, and it really resonated with me as a former yoga teacher and yoga teacher trainer. And I really liked it. And I thought, man, I'm going to get this book one day because it's so great. However, I know some of you may be going, well, I'm not listening for divorce advice or anything. Why should I even listen to Mike today? And I found a great review that I think will be very beneficial. It's actually on Amazon, so you can all look it up. You type in on Amazon his book title, and you'll see it from an Anne Walmsley right around the time he published it in 2016. And here it is. You don't need to have a disintegrating marriage to find The Yoga of Divorce an engaging read. I came to this highly original memoir as a happily married reader looking for creative nonfiction. Mike MacConnell recounts how he drew on his yoga practice and his underlying philosophy to achieve a non-adversarial divorce. I liked how candid and concrete it was, and sometimes funny. The narrative transports the reader from his initial fears and distrust to the calm of his yoga mat to his kitchen on acid division day. By the end, I was utterly convinced that downward-facing dog and mountain pose were fundamental to conflict resolution and stress reduction of every type, and that the author's generosity of spirit has a lot to teach us all. How appropriate that his journey led to a new career in conflict resolution.
I had not
Nice.
known that existed.
Isn't it delightful?
I will send a thank you to Ms. Walmsley.
Yeah. And honestly, not that I had a chance to read all of it yet, because I am getting a copy. And as I told you in our disclosure of our email exchanges, that I'm encouraging other mediators to get it. I remember having that sense of, oh, this man knows about the mediation and meditation aspect of a yoga, health, well-being, stress reduction practice. And I think that's a really good way to help anybody with any type of conflict resolution. And I thought maybe you'd like to share your thoughts on that.
Well, maybe might make sense to focus on how the book really is much broader in its scope than the title would suggest. The title, is accurate because in my own case, it was a divorce that I was going through, and for which I found my work on the mat to be particularly useful. So, and that's the story that I'm talking about. But the really important, from my point of view, at least the important message there is it doesn't really matter what the source of the stress might be, whether it is from a marriage breakup or right around the same time, my business at the time was dissolving, and I had parents who were in their final stages of lung cancer. So there was stress from all kinds of directions, as there is, I think, in the life of each one of us. The point of the yoga, and the yoga is also a bit of a metaphor. In other words, what I'm really talking about is the importance of having some kind of mindfulness practice, some kind of therapeutic technique for resolving stress, for moving the stress through. And that when that is done, it enables us to just respond more effectively to whatever it is that is going wrong. And so whether it's yoga that you're doing, or whether it's swimming or Pilates or something, but something that really does take your mind away from the issue that you're being stressed out by, and it will enable you to think more clearly. And that's really what this is, what the book is about.
Yeah. And I think it's so important for people to understand that, finding a specific type of activity isn't necessarily meant to be disassociative or distracting to get you away. It's maybe just a little bit of a break from it, but it also helps you sort of recharge you. I don't know, Dale, considering such a yogi practitioner that you are, what's your take on our initial conversation?
I've never been into a yoga class, so she's being very hyperbolic there. No, but I do meditation. Actually, I don't know if you remember, but I am a certified hypnotherapist from back in California. So never did a practice though, but no, I definitely see the benefits of that meditative state and calming for sure. It makes a lot of sense to me.
And psychologists who talk about stress reduction, Daniel Goleman, for example, who did most of the work on EQ, on emotional intelligence, talks about distraction as actually being a psychologically very healthy practice, provided that we're not using it as to escape. Stay in escape mode, but to escape periodically so that we can recharge and refresh is really important. And I guess so that doesn't mean that all distractions are created equally, because they're not. No. If if you've got the picture of your challenging person and you're like punching at it, that's probably not going to be as effective. It might distract you a little bit, but it keeps you in a negative frame of mind. It keeps you in a, fixated on something that in fact can increase the stress. So getting away from it and really putting your mind elsewhere can bring you back restored. And that was my experience. And as it turns out, according to the tradition of yoga, the Iyengar tradition that I am trained in, the specific poses have specific effects. So back bends tend to energize you, whereas forward bends reduce stress. And there are different poses that can be practiced specifically for different states of mind that might be bothering you.
Yeah, I really like that you said that, but I know that having been in the yoga world for a long time and being a clinical based practitioner before I switched to mediation, there are a lot of people, the moment they even hear the word yoga, it's very triggering for them. So even to hear that there are nervous system calming, they think, oh, no, that's just made up, but it's not. There has actually been quite a lot of scientific research and study to show how calming it is on the nervous system. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a austere traditional yoga setting. There are different aspects of just the pure movement in and of itself that can bring about its own energizing or calming state because of how our biologic nervous system is developed, has evolved.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're the sort of listener who is either triggered or turned off by the notion of yoga, fine, don't worry about it. It doesn't have to be yoga. Let it be walking. Let it be swimming. Let it be. It really isn't. We don't want to get, it's not just one way up the mountain. The point is there are ways to resolve issues. And the big thing to avoid is the learned helplessness that comes from feeling overwhelmed and then deciding there's nothing I can do, or the only thing I can do is to get angry and become aggressive. And what we're looking for here in the approach to mediation is to find a middle path, somewhere between giving up and doing nothing at one extreme, what we call the avoidance, which is a response strategy that occasionally is important to use. There are times when you want to avoid.
Gotta run away from that bear.
Exactly. But if that's what you're doing all the time with your problems, they never get better. So if you're just not dealing with the problems with your spouse or your best friend or your work colleagues, then finding a middle path between flipping out and making it worse because you shouted, or the other extreme, making it worse because you never brought it up, so nothing ever gets dealt with and people don't even know what you're bothered by, that there is this middle route. And so to me, the whole title of the Yoga of Divorce is a metaphor. It doesn't have to be yoga and it doesn't have to be divorce, but it is essential that people make conscious choices to respond, because otherwise our nervous systems get triggered by what they refer to as the threat response.
Yes.
So the sense of threat, the uncertainty of life is uncertain. And that sense of being threatened really removes the capacity to think clearly just at the time you need it most, because the sky's falling and you need to make decisions. And that's when you are least capable, unless you've built resources the way we're describing.
And we could deep dive, probably not today, but into it, because I used to get really hardcore into research about pain and pain responses. But you're bringing up such a good point, is even in conflict, sometimes it's not even with your spouse or your coworker that you're really fighting with. Something has actually triggered you from your past, or some sort of repeated pattern that's triggered in you and you're not even aware, but your system is charged and in fight mode and ready to react. And you're in this stance, and that boxer stance, for lack of a better term, of like getting ready to fight, that other person is suddenly like, whoa, I just asked you how your day was. And here you are coming in. Like, what happened? Mike, I have to tell you, my husband and I don't fight often, but when we do, it's a little explosive. We're just like, hey, and then we're fine. Right. And the thing is like, my husband has a big aversion strategy. Like what he does is he hides. And I really hate it. It's very triggering for me. And I can mostly understand, okay, he just needs a little bit of time. And if I can allow him to have that time, if I can recognize it's not about me, it's not about that situation, it's just this is what he needs. Unfortunately, sometimes, I've come in, I'm very upset. I need that connection. I need to check in with my spouse, and I just need to be like, ugh. And so I come in so intense sometimes, which is,
You're the bear.
Yeah. And I just have this moment of like, I just need to just like verbally process it with my best friend, because I've been holding it. I've been the mediator, the peacemaker all week. And I just need to go, honey, I need a hug. I need a check in. And he's like, go away. And I'm like, what's wrong? And we've been married 10 years, 10 years, very long. I have contemplated murdering him several times over. But the truth is that I sometimes just do not remember that if I can just give him a bit of space, we're going to resolve it and we're going to be fine. And I can't get mad at him but I also need him to recognize that sometimes if I'm coming in hot, I just need a really quick, like maybe a 3-second hug and just a quick, I need a break and I will check in with you at this time. Like, just give me a heads up to remind me. And so that's what we've been working on for a while, like 10 years.
But it sounds like you are. But that's so much of what the nature of conflict resolution really is helping people to communicate in such a way that, first of all, they're reflecting and aware of what their unmet needs are, so that they can inform the other person of them. And that's a route to, it doesn't mean that you share the same needs, because I've done workplace mediations where one person wants music and vitality in the workspace and it energizes them. The other person needs silence and quiet and so they can concentrate better. And each one tends to judge the other. The one who wants the vitality thinks the other person's a stick in the mud and you're no fun. And the person who wants the silence thinks the other person is, a show off or a loudmouth or whatever sort
disorganized.
Disorganized. Whatever judgments they might come up with are almost always based on not really having an understanding of what it is that person needs. And you don't have to agree that they should need it, because you don't. But if that person does, then the maturity, the growth of each party is in recognizing, well, even if I don't have that need, the fact that you do is something I respect. Now, let's figure out, how can we manage this workplace or this relationship so that I do get the hugs when I need them, or I get the, some silent time, but there's also time for whatever else the other. But unless people talk about what they need, you have these relationships where, if he really loved me, he would know what I need. No,
that annoys me so much.
I hate that.
Yeah. You know what? And we've kind of all been there. Like, probably every adult. When I was a teenager, if my parents really cared, they would know what I was going through. No, they wouldn't. I never spoke to them when I was a teenager. Share anything. Right?
Yeah, how you doing? Fine.
Exactly. Fine. If they really cared, they would have known what that meant.
Yeah, the whole Lord of the Rings trilogy was it compacted into that fine.
into that word fine. Exactly. And that's why when I became a professional full-time mediator, I chose the name for my company, Reflective Mediation, because a big part of what we do when the temperature goes up in the room, people that emotions are high, I'll slow things down by asking party A, what did you just hear party B is saying. It's called active listening. And it means each one is like a mirror reflecting what, not at every point in the conversation, but when the temperature goes up, to really slow it down and go, and the person who's just repeated what they thought the first one had said, the first person might say, well, actually that wasn't quite what I was saying. You got the first part, but you missed this, and the other thing. And then once each person has felt heard by the other, that's when now they can be on the same team and figuring out, okay, so you want more free time and fun for the kids, and I want more discipline and work habits. So, okay, what can we do to bring the best of both of these into our parenting strategy? But something that you had said, Chantal, I want to just circle back to a second ago, that you were talking about noticing what was going on in you and having to admit that. And that's the first place you mediate within yourself.
Right.
Because we each have sides of us that want to run away and end the relationship, and sides of us that want, so those different parts really it all begins internally. Now, I'm not doing psychotherapy when I work with my clients. And so if they want to do deep work with that, although I do private coaching, and we'll do a certain amount of this, but the coaching I do would be very much directed towards specific problems,
outcomes, and action oriented.
Right. It's very action oriented. It's very problem solution oriented, as opposed to just a general, personal growth sort of thing. So it is very solution oriented, but asking people to do that, like, what role do you see yourself having in this difficulty? And that was what you were saying, Chantal, that made me see that, you're doing that reflection, because you recognized when you described that little, the issue that is occasionally come up with between you and your husband, you recognized that you had a role in, at times, being difficult from his point of view.
Oh, I'm so difficult. I admit it.
but I've got one client right now who I think I'm probably going to have to let them know that maybe mediation
isn't going to work
the right
for them.
way for them.
Yeah.
Because one of the parties is convinced that they have zero responsibility in the breakdown. It is 100%
one way.
The other person. And look, even if
that's 100%
even
true.
If it was 80-20, first of all, there's no such thing as it's all one person.
Right?
It's just not even remotely possible. But
because you're still there.
Theory,
right? You're still in the situation.
Even if you were a better parent and a better person and a better spouse than the other person, you can't change them.
What?
You can shift. You certainly can't force them to change. You might motivate or inspire them to change if they see some change in you. And if that doesn't motivate anything and it doesn't get any better, then co-parenting is going to be tough for you, but you will have changed so that the next relationship you have better skills.
Hopefully.
Well,
and
that's a big part of actually, it was funny because when I was writing the book, one of my brothers was, I was explaining to him what I was writing about. What are you doing that for? And it was all her fault. Why are you talking about what you need?
Why
to
are you
do
being so generous?
and I said, not really interested in what she needs to do differently. That's now her job.
Yep.
I mean, I'm interested, but it's not on me.
Mm-hmm.
But
was it ever true is the question. Like, there's a role you play as a support person in a partnership, but you aren't necessarily that person. You could be an impetus for change, but you're not the driver of change. They still have to be the driver of change.
Yeah. Exactly. And to take responsibility for our own emotions.
Yes.
So rather than you made me angry, it's no, I need a quiet listener. When you shout, my response is to become angry. Why? Not because of you, but because these are my needs. Mm-hmm. This is the person I am. And I didn't necessarily choose to have the needs I have. Some people need much, slower vehicles on the road than others, right?
Yes.
And that's just their temperament. That's that's just how they're wired. People don't necessarily choose it. But once you've got it, don't blame the other person for not understanding it or the world for not having removed all challenges from you.
Right.
The challenges are how we grow. Okay? You don't go to the gym to have no challenge. You want to get stronger? You want to be more physically fit? Then you have to push against hardship. And the same thing is in relationships.
Well, I love that you bring that up, because I've met a lot of people who are very resistant to change internally. And one of them is my dad. He's not my biological father, but he raised me. So he is my father. And he is so resistant to change. And we had a really great sort of communication breakthrough one time when he was upset. He was charged. But he was angry, like, his first response is to always say no. Even when he wants us, it's like, our main joke is my dad just like, hey, Dad, you want $1 billion? No. It's just it's his automatic response. But we once had this moment where he was just like, I don't like change. And I said, but Dad, change is inevitable. Like, you're going to get old. You're going to, like, things are just going. And even when you choose to not do something, that is the choice. By not deciding to stay the same, it's still a choice. And it's going to change you and have an impact on you over time. And of course, he said no. And he walked away.
No.
Well, and that's a perfect little encapsulation of again, we talk about mediating within ourselves. Emotionally, none of us want change. We're all frightened of it. None of us, we would love the security of a world that doesn't change. But the rational mind, and I'm sure that your dad, in his quiet moment, is quite aware when he's being rational that change is inevitable and there's nothing he can do about it.
Well,
he just doesn't like it. Is he that?
He's very fear response based. I mean, he is. There's a lot of amazing qualities, so I don't want to detract. And if he's listening, sorry, Dad, for just putting you on a spot here in our interview. No, but truly, like, he is a very stable man. He's a very calm man in many ways. He has many artistic talents. And for someone who claims to be so not emotional, he is the most emotional man in my entire life. It's the problem is it's anger first. And it comes from his learned responses as a child and his upbringing. And even, I think, probably genetics play a role, which we're going to be getting a little bit into Dale's territory, because we haven't introduced Dale completely to you, Mike. He is a genealogist. He does research. He's amazing at it. And we learn all sorts of really interesting stories, not just from his family, but Dale, I'm sure you have watched how people have tried to mediate or conflict resolve through your studies in the past.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and you can see the generational trauma going down through generations too, and people just not learning from it.
Mm. Do you think, Mike, that are there, because we see this discussed in different areas. Have you, in your experience as a mediator, have you met people from maybe different cultures, ethnicities, different types of backgrounds that make them more open to the conflict resolution of mediation, whereas others aren't? Does that make sense? Am I going there?
Yeah. There's quite a bit of study directed at the moment to the cultural biases that are hidden within the model of mediation that we are trained in. Mm-hmm. So we're trained in a model that really assumes that people will take responsibility for themselves as individuals. Mm-hmm. And there are I have had some clients where, in fact, I've done workshops in case where I did a workshop with a community of people. They were health workers from a particular community in Toronto, where when I asked for questions or response and feedback, nobody would speak. Mm-hmm. And when I, at break, and I was like, but it wasn't that they were uninterested. They were taking notes and I've discovered they saw me as the authority. They didn't want to hear one another. Mm-hmm. They weren't interested in what any of them might have had to say. What I might think is irrelevant. Mike is the expert. Mike needs to speak. Mm-hmm. So if you're mediating in a situation where two people from a culture like that are trying to resolve their issue, they really want me to be the decision maker, to essentially be the judge. And that's not what we are trained to do. And we're not even, frankly, actually allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. We can say some people do it this way, some people do it that way. How would you like to do? We can, offer a range of suggestions for, different possible scenarios that might resolve some of their issues. But the decision making in the model of mediation as it currently exists as an interest-based approach, developed out of Harvard, and now spread across pretty much the Western world, is based on the assumption that people have individual needs. That's the source of the conflict, is private needs not being met. Well, if you see yourself as really not that much of an individual, just part of a family that's part of a community, that's part of a nation, and your individual needs aren't the issue, then perhaps a more authoritarian model of conflict resolution would work better for that. Or would they just go to the elder, right, who would tell them what to do and resolve it for them?
Or the fortune teller. That's what I learned when I was living in Taiwan is, because Taiwan, a lot of people aren't aware that it was under a dictatorship for so long, and there was very much a tell on your neighbor, tell on your parent, tell this, and it was very authoritarian structured, and you were a part of a functioning whole, you were a part of a group, you were not meant to think for yourself, you're meant to think for the benefit of, almost, it's not to say that people weren't wonderfully individualized and had these beautiful expressions in art and creativity. And there was a lot of really interesting things that happened, but they don't conflict resolve in the same way that we do in the West. And one thing that I thought was really interesting is learning that you don't go to a doctor or a psychotherapist, because that was fairly new and it was fairly Western idea. and your doctor, the malady, when you're going to the Chinese traditional medicine doctor, they are maybe giving you herbs that can help you calm your emotions and your anger and help you channel and get rid of bad qi and whatnot. And you're maybe getting that. But if you're having a bad time with your boss, you don't tell your coworker, you certainly don't tell your parents. Who do you talk to? Who is that person in the society? It's the fortune teller. Because you go to them and you're actually telling them all your problems. It really was a precursor. It's an older version of psychoanalysis and therapy that when I was there and I had an experience of it, I walked away with a totally different outlook. Because, we have a tendency in the West, when we hear fortune tellers, we think, witch, burn them. Burn them. And that's just not how it works over there. And then a friend was telling me about griot culture in certain African cultures, that there is someone who has a more medicine, therapeutic, but also, as you said, more of an authoritarian. You go to them and they might help you relate and tell the story, but also bring in the story of your ancestry and whatnot. It's like, well, you're feeling this way because of the conflict that happened over here, and you need to be resolving it. So we're going to be doing some things. But griot culture, I don't know how prevalent it is in these African countries anymore, never having been to Africa myself. So I suppose we'd have to find someone. Maybe listeners can come and be like, get in contact with Mike and me, and then we can all have this wonderful learning session.
but the work that we do sometimes does incorporate conflict resolution techniques that come from other cultures.
Yes.
So I'm trained in restorative justice circles, which comes from indigenous communities, not just in North America, South America, and really early cultures all over the planet. It's very, very successful, also very community oriented, and it's not the same as the kind of very individualistic approach that is taken in our justice system. And mediation is part of the justice system. Sometimes people, I want to work with you, Mike, because I don't want to work with lawyers and the justice system. And I said, well, we're still part of the justice system. Yeah. Well, it depends if it's mother and daughter having conflict, then obviously justice system wouldn't normally be involved, unless there was some criminal charge. But in separation and divorce, which is most of the work I do, it's, one way to get that is through litigation. And what we're suggesting is conversation over litigation, that if you choose a non-adversarial route, there's still differences, there are still disagreements, but we're trying to help you to build understanding, what I refer to as separate paths, but shared understanding. So we're going in different directions.
I
but
like
we both
that.
share the understanding of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Dale?
And that doesn't happen in court.
No. Dale, how is this hitting you? Because, of course, I just want to deep dive into all of our work jargon stuff with Mike, and I'm holding myself back so hard. So how you doing over there?
No, I'm doing good. It's interesting listening to what you're talking about. I keep going back in my own head, just I guess because it's my background of seeing generational trauma and how that works. And I've seen so many families where, as I'm tracing the family back, each generation, they're making bad decisions, getting into trouble. And I keep trying to figure out, okay, what is causing this? And then eventually can get to a point where you find a generation in that family where they're relatively happy, but there was some big traumatic event, and that it changed the family at that point, where the children didn't quite recover from it, and they passed that on to their children and their children. And the families where this generational trauma seems to be persistent, it are the ones that also come from either a regional culture or just within their own family, that they just do not communicate. They don't communicate their feelings. They don't communicate with each other. Everything that you're talking about, with German and English families both tend to have those that idea, stiff upper lip. Yeah, don't cry. Especially the boys, not allowed to cry, not allowed to talk about your feelings, and it persists, and it keeps going and keeps going and keeps going because they don't learn from it and they don't address the problem. So, yeah, I see that quite a lot. So I hear a lot of that in what you're talking about, too.
When it's gone on for generations, the way you're describing it, Dale, it sounds like it must be so difficult to root out.
Yeah.
And do you see families at times, though, really making that effort?
Yeah. I see it more recently, and I think it's what helped me recognize it was with my own family. My father's family is all very well adjusted, I guess you would say, fairly happy, good. They make good decisions. My mother's side of the family, not so much. They've got a lot of trouble there.
Problems, just a few.
just a few. But my mom was kind of kept away from the larger family, and me more so. I was kept away from it, and looking at those families, you can see where either by circumstance they are disassociated from the problem, and so they can gradually get out of it, or they recognize the problem and they make an effort to get out of it. The problem is the recognition. And it's so hard to even have that recognition if you're not having the conversation to begin with.
Yeah. And if you don't have some exposure to a different way of behaving.
Right. Yeah. And then it can go for so many generations that people lose the original context. It's like two countries, fighting for centuries, and they forget what the original problem even was. Yeah.
Yeah, my uncle was from Sicily, and before he passed, I started asking him, like, what? Because he and my aunt, they went to Italy a few times, but he refused to go to Sicily, and he kept saying how he had no interest in there. And I started asking him, he would talk a little bit more, but he said even these small, tiny towns, because Sicily's quite small compared to Canada and America. But there were these generational arguments and these these fights that could just go on, and as Dale said, it's like no one knew that it really started about someone cheating them over the price of a cow in the 16th century. They just hate each other.
Yeah. Well, and there's CT will learn more about this later in a future episode that we're going to be doing on my other podcast, but a similar thing there. I was recently working on a story of a teenage girl who was murdered by her boyfriend not too long ago. This is in 1952. And I didn't know if I wanted to do the story because it was too recent. I didn't want there to be family that it could, traumatize further. Yeah. But I found that she had a sister who is still alive. She's 84. And I reached out to her and I said, look, if you do not want me to do this story, I will not do it. But, what are your feelings? She wanted me to do it. She not only wanted me to do it, she wanted me to interview her because she recognized that it was part of a larger generational issue. And it's like, well, how could that be part of a larger generational issue? And she said her sister, there had been like sexual abuse in the family. And because of that, her sister picked this boyfriend who she knew was a problem and abusive. And
And
that
maybe
was
not
the
even
outcome.
necessarily known problem. Like,
Not-
hey,
yeah,
hey,
not
excuse me,
consciously
are
no,
you an
but
abuser?
subconsciously.
You are? Oh, great. Let's date.
Yeah. But clearly he didn't have a lot of green flags going.
Yeah.
There's red flags all over the place. And she should have been able to recognize those.
Yeah. And that's the problem is, it took me going to therapy, and I'm sure, like, Mike, you can tell me if you've noticed couples that you've seen in conflict, whether they continue and complete a divorce and separation, or they go through the mediation process and suddenly they're like, you know what, this was great. Maybe we'll take a step back and maybe we won't go through it, but through with a divorce. But I'm sure you might have seen some people who've benefited from that yogic work or therapy work or some way to sort of resolve some of those internal conflicts or generational conflicts. And you maybe compare those to some people who you might want to be like, here's a card. Go do some work and come back.
I mean, I don't do yogic or therapeutic work directly with them.
Mm-hmm.
I just do conflict resolution so they can make decisions about how they want to function, whether they're still together or whether they're getting separated.
Mm-hmm.
And the act of having facilitated conversations so that you're actually listening to one another, very often for the first time, has in about a half dozen cases where they started out intending to separate, and along the way began to understand one another more thoroughly. That's why you did those things.
Well, yeah.
I didn't get that. Well, if the other person's going, oh yeah, then in fact they're still going to get divorced. But once, but if there is actually a kind of the light going on of like, okay, I'm getting now a clearer sense, then in fact a number, and at that point I would normally refer them to people who specialize in marriage therapy, because one thing I've discovered was when I tried to do that rebuilding love is much more difficult as a facilitator than it is to work out an agreement between some coworkers in an office space,
right,
where the emotion is really much lower, or when people are separating and getting a divorce, and it's a very legally structured document that we're creating that has to tick off a whole lot of boxes around finances and parenting and all those sorts of things. It's not to say that it's easy, but it's got a structure to it that is very, very clear. And so whether they like one another or not doesn't really get in the way if they're respectful enough to just say, okay, what can we construct that's going to enable us to raise healthy kids from two separate households? And normally the love of the kids is enough, or the love of the money if they don't have kids. Do we want to spend $100,000 fighting? Like, come on, let's do this.
Yeah, it's reasonable.
So those motivations will help people to get through when it is a separation or just a problem solve. When they actually reconnect and decide, hey, wait, I don't want to get separated at all anymore. I actually think that we've got something special here that we lost sight of. Then, I mean, those are fabulous moments. They're just wonderful and celebratory and congratulatory and all that kind of stuff. And I'll do a couple more sessions with them just to tidy up some of the sort of practical issues. But when it comes to rebuilding that romantic relationship, that's just infinitely more complex than what co-parenting I refer to my clients. I say, you're now in a business partnership. It's the
Yes.
business of raising healthy children.
Yes.
It's not as complicated as a romantic relationship, because you don't have to be best friends. You don't have to be the person that's the go-to person.
Yeah.
You're not responsible for their feelings. Well, you never really were, but you don't have to feel that anymore. But you do have to behave. There are very clear guidelines for how to be an effective co-parent, and that I can help. And I do a lot of coaching with people after the separation is done and they've signed it, and then they're just trying to iron out some of the parenting issues. No problem. That kind of facilitation I can do. And I think back to your question about does the process improve relationships? Only occasionally improve to the point where they want to stay married.
Try again,
But in every situation, it improves their relationship.
Yeah. I mean, you really hit on a couple of things that I think are core requisites for going in. And because you hit that, it is more interest-based. It isn't about adversarial. It isn't about winning, and I think anyone who's really out to win doesn't even realize that going to court is not a winning thing. There's something very, very harmful about the court process. So once they realize maybe they don't want to spend all of that money, but they still have that drive to win, once they maybe need to do a little bit of interpersonal work first, or take a break first, because coming to private mediation is really, you said, respect.
If the respect isn't there, you're not mediating in good faith.
Right.
Doesn't mean you have to you can actually hate the person.
Yeah.
That is
never want to see their
disqualifying.
face. Yeah.
It does not disqualify you from the process. As long as you are able to acknowledge that person's needs are as legitimate to them as your needs are. If you can't accept that person has legitimate needs different from your own, then I can't work with you. Mediation cannot work for you.
Yeah.
But I like what you said, Chantal. I think that's really important. It doesn't necessarily mean mediation won't be the right process, but it means it's not the right process now. You might need to take half a year to just travel, to go away, to build yourself back up.
Go have those dates with random people.
Whatever it means, because right now they are there's a branch of mediation called narrative mediation.
Yes.
They talk about conflict saturation. You're so saturated with the conflict, you can't see anything else. And in that case, you can go to court if you can't wait. But court is going to be an exercise in unbelievable frustration. Because you're paying through the nose.
Yes.
It's going to take years instead of months.
It's slow. It's so slow. People don't get that.
It's so slow. It's going to be 3 to 5 years, and you lose all decision-making authority. You're giving all the decision to somebody else. And some people say, I'll take all of that, because they still think there's going to be vindication. That it's on the public record.
It was your fault. It's like, no.
But this is, and I explain this to them, or their lawyers do, because I work with collaborative lawyers who don't want to go to court.
Yes.
And a lot of people just don't get it, because the truth is, in the States as in Canada, since 1968, divorce has become a no-fault process. What?
Exactly.
What do you mean? But it's his fault. It's her fault. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
The judge is not going to be looking at. So you think that you're going to get vindication, that somehow the system, the public is going to see that it was. Nobody wants to hear whose fault it was.
Nobody cares.
Aren't going to listen to you. No, the only place that the past has any role in the court process is around some of the financial
and
history.
children.
Well,
Yeah.
well, the only thing in childcare is, are they spending 90% of the time with one parent, not the other?
Yes.
That would, but who was a better mom? Who was a better dad? Who would cook more healthy meals, or who was who had 15 lovers on the side?
They don't care.
The court doesn't care.
Yeah.
That's absolutely. Yeah. But that person took the money and lost it in Vegas. Doesn't matter. It was lost during the marriage. Bye-bye. It's gone.
Yep.
How it got lost, who lost it. It's a no fault process. And so they just end up spending those hundreds of thousands of dollars
to learn that very hard lesson
in order to find out that what you were being told at the beginning was actually true all along.
And then they hate lawyers, which I think is really funny, because that's one reason why I've really enjoyed talking to you, especially that you've also mentioned that you work with collaborative lawyers and bring that, because I'm very pro lawyer as well. But what I've learned from people who complain about family court or mediation or what have you is, I've learned, if I listen long enough, I realize they wanted the win. They wanted someone to tell the other party that they were wrong, and that this person, I was right, they were wrong. And they wanted to have it, but still learned, exactly as you said, in the end, the judge didn't care. and they spent like $100,000 learning that.
And you know what, mediator, I won't say I don't care, but I do, put them into breakout rooms, or so when I say, I can, and totally empathize to say, look, I can understand how hurt you are. It totally makes sense. I totally get that. And it is important for you. I'm not saying it isn't important, but it's important for you in the work you do with your therapist or with your new partner or rebuilding your life. It is simply not relevant to what we are doing here, what you're paying me for. You're paying me on an hourly basis. So if you want to talk about all your pain from the past, you know what? Like, it's not a good use of your money.
Yeah.
Because
and really of your time.
Of your time. If I've had people who want to pay me to do private coaching and they just want to tell me all that stuff, I'll let them know, like, as long as you understand it isn't of practical significance, if you want me to listen and just to be the sounding board and help you kind of process things, then I'll do that. I will, but not with the other person present, because the fees are split. In other words, I'm not going to ask the other person to pay half of my hourly fee for you to do essentially a
coaching session.
A coaching session. But if you want to pay my full fee and do private coaching with me on that stuff, and I have had cases where that's happened, and after doing the coaching, the person is then clear enough that they can come back, and the other party had to know that it was happening. They don't know what we're talking about, but gives permission for the coaching to occur. And then, so that it's not done, secretly. I don't want it to look like there's
we're in secret. We're meeting without you. No,
well, we are meeting without you. If you give us,
I like you better than the other person.
But in every time I've ever asked one party, are you okay with me doing private coaching with the other? Every single time. Yes, please do it. do it. If it will help them to come to the table more decisively, more openly, more, less adversarially, please. Yes, absolutely. Every single time that I've asked, they have agreed.
I am so glad you're going to become one of my new referral sources for private coaching in separation and divorce, because I'm not there yet. I have no interest in listening to someone talk and verbally process with me. I'm here for the agreement, and that's That's what I'm here for.
It's actually much, I don't know, easier might not be the right word. More pleasant because it doesn't have the tension. You're not in between two people who are
true.
At one another. So let's just say there's, and you can go much deeper because the person isn't having to listen or they're not having to sort what they say because of what the other person might hear.
Right. They're not conscious of trying to always filter it because they've had that chance to process.
And
it's
totally confidential. I mean, I would lose my license to practice if I ever shared any of it.
Exactly.
And so the people tend to become quite vulnerable and open. They do have to be reminded sometimes that, please don't mistake it for psychotherapy. Okay. We're not trying to change underlying personality structures.
We're not practicing CBT on you. There's none of this. There's no ACT on you.
Yeah. Like there ends up being a little bit of it actually snuck in the side.
In any dialogue.
But it's just exactly.
Yeah.
But the whole purpose of this is so that you can come back into sessions and solve problems more skillfully.
Yes.
It's got a very pragmatic goal to it, as opposed to, I don't know, I want to be a better person or happier or something like that. You might become a better person. You might become happier or less addicted to conflict, but
I'm going to confess. Yeah, I'm going to confess this because as a clinical massage therapist for so many years, I had a lot of people who were starting to use me as a little bit of that psychotherapist. So I got very skilled at being able to refer out when I could detect those flags.
Yeah.
And right now, like that's what attracted me to mediation as well, is that I knew rubbing their bodies and moving their joints and doing that wasn't necessarily helping them solve the problem, that they needed something a bit more action. So it was more, why aren't you just going and setting up a contract that gets you on a plan? And that is what really attracted me about mediation is we're here to resolve a problem. And not necessarily forevermore. We're not etching it in stone, especially with kids. As they grow, their needs change, right? They're going to maybe require something different, or especially in a separation and divorce, you may suddenly go, hey, well, now I've met someone else and there's a new factor in because they live in another city. And now we have to talk about if we should be having the same kind of division and yada, yada, yada. And so those interim agreements are so critical for those times. So that's what drew me into mediation. And I think I'm reluctant and I'm to sit in private coaching sessions right now just because.
You go send them to me. I'll be happy
I'll be like, okay, listen, go talk to Mike and then we'll have the mediation, okay?
And it's all done on Zoom, so it doesn't matter if where you are, as long as you've got an internet connection, we can meet.
I love it. Okay, Mike, I love that you were willing to help come and re-record this because you're such a delight to talk to.
It was just so much fun to talk about these things that are so close to all of our hearts.
Yeah. And Dale, I hope we didn't talk shop too much.
It was interesting. It was really good.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So listeners, if you have any questions for Mike MacConnell, we will put some of his contacts in the show notes. You're also welcome to write us at toughcallmediation@gmail.com for any questions or even anecdotes if you want to share some times that mediation worked for you or some of the mindfulness that we touched on today. If you have a particular anecdote that helped you resolve a conflict, it would be lovely to read some of your stories and your thoughts. Please don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe. And thank you so much for listening. I hope we have a chance to talk to you again, Mike, if you're willing to come back.
I would love to.
Excellent. Okay,
Thanks
well,
a lot, Chantel.
thank you.
Great meeting you, Dale.
Yeah.
Yes, great to meet you.
Okay, everyone. Bye for now.
This podcast brought to you by Blush Productions. Our senior producer and editor is Tyree Lawton. Tech advisor is Ken Ayler. Media by Hope Ersick. Original music by Tyree Lawton. Email your questions to toughcallmediation@gmail.com. Like, rate, and subscribe. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. Check out aylerservices.com for more information.